Well, another year of Minnesota Viking football is now in the books, and I've been wanting to talk about it now for a couple of days now that the season is done after their wild card defeat to the New York Giants. I'm recording this on Tuesday night, so maybe there'll be some things happening Wednesday morning, maybe a defensive coordinator change. We'll see. Video probably goes out Wednesday, but I'm recording Tuesday night, about 48 hours after the dust has settled after the Vikings season has come to an end. Been thinking about it a lot. Wanted to talk about the season a bit today. And I haven't talked about them much on the channel lately because usually it's something negative that gets me to want to talk about them. Like just being terrible a couple of years ago was enough. And I talked about them a couple times last year, mainly off season and end of year. But I've actually been, pretty positive about the Vikings this year, and when you're 13-4, that's pretty easy. But wanted to talk about the season, just kind of recap and reflect on what was a fun Viking year, but obviously it's incomplete like the other 61 seasons that they have had. So I'm trying to put a bit more effort into this video, kind of testing to see if I want to do more NFL content like this. So I have an overlay, or I'll make one. I haven't actually made anything yet as I record this, but I will. I will make one. And I want to show like stats and stuff as I reference them. So hopefully it's a more interesting watch than some of these I've done in the past, where it's just like a thumbnail and then I talk over it. Like maybe after doing this for over 10 years, I should level up some of the content I do, even if it's just stuff I do on the side. But as you can tell, I'm not too distraught over the Vikings season. I wasn't expecting them to lose to the Giants. I expected a good game. I expected a win at the same time. But, the Viking defense wanted to be worse than they had been at any point in the season. And then the Vikings could not move the ball well enough in the fourth quarter. They had a couple really bad drives, especially the second to last one with those two screen passes of all things to try to construct a game-tying drive around. But I wanted to start off by kind of recapping the season and then maybe go through the schedule and some of my thoughts and bring up some numbers. So I hope you enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Let me know if you want to see more of this throughout the off season or whatever. Well, let's get into it. So, Vikings 13-4 like we all expected. Certainly they overachieved this year. Nobody had them as winners of more than 10 games, which is what I thought they could do optimistically. Thinking about Kevin O'Connell, offensive coach, Rams roots, Justin Jefferson at receiver, Kirk Cousins at quarterback. Certainly with expanded wildcard fields here, this could be a playoff team is what I was thinking. 10 wins was what I wanted to see. And so for them to go in 13 is a pretty big jump there. And already 10 was above like Vegas win odds or win total predictions. So it's hard to summarize this season, especially with the playoffs taking such a hard departure from the regular season. But it was certainly a Vikings season of football. So the Vikings go 13-4 this year with a negative 3-point differential, which has never been done before in the NFL. It is by far the lowest point differential for a 13-win team, led to everybody calling the Vikings frauds, led to this point differential being a constant talking point. It kind of feels like people would have respected them more if they had lost a few of those one-score games. I mean, it's kind of whatever, but I was always wanting to see them hopefully, prove people wrong and win one of these games that they were underdogs in, and it just didn't really happen. But to win 13 games, I think, is pretty impressive given this roster and a first-year head coach, first-year defensive coordinator. Although it's a very veteran-built team, like this was very much Rick Spielman's team still, with a lot of holdovers from the 2017 team that actually had a good defense. It went on the long run to the NFC Championship. But now it's a much older version of that team that hasn't been replenished with young talent very much. I think we all knew this was going to be an offensive football team, and thankfully Kevin O'Connell and his offense, I think, mostly delivered, but has a lot of things that I want to see get better in the year 2 version. But the Vikings finished top 10 in so many offensive categories. They were 8th in points a game, 6th in yards a game, 10th in third down conversion percentage, 8th in red zone scoring touchdown percentage. Kind of all the things that I look for there in an offense, they hit on. They did not have a good running game. Dalvin ran for 1,000 yards. That doesn't really matter. The Vikings ran the ball infrequently and didn't really run it well when they did. They were 26th in yards per rush, 30th in rushes a game, and 28th in rush yards a game. The running game never really seemed to click, and it seemed like most of their runs were just a negative play for them. Like, it didn't help them much. A 4-yard run was a big success, whereas for a lot of other teams, it's like the expectation. Obviously, Justin Jefferson had a fantastic season, and I think he solidified himself as the number 1 receiver in the NFL, or at least top 2 or 3 if you have another favorite. Not really any sense of arguing it, but Jefferson is at least one of the best. 1,800 plus yards this season. Had a real shot at 2,000 if they just finished the year in a different way. And the game against the Packers kind of put that one to bed. It's been a lot of fun seeing Jefferson become one of the NFL's best receivers. And this was the first year where it actually felt like you could enjoy his success, whereas 2020, 2021 were not fun years for Vikings football. I talked about last year how I think 21 was my least favorite year of watching the team ever. It was just not enjoyable, and it was very different this year. They won 11 regular season games by 1 score and didn't lose any, which was dramatically different from 2021, where they blew a bunch of games. Like, it was interesting how everybody really it felt like the public turned on the Vikings this year when they couldn't beat the Cowboys as underdogs, when they couldn't beat the Lions as underdogs, and had to keep pulling out ridiculous ways to beat teams like the Colts. Whereas last year, like, it felt like people respected them more because they got, like, historically unlucky in 1-score games and were maybe 1 win away from the playoffs. I'd much rather see the team be on the overrated side of things than the, like, underdog that people are like, oh, you could have been a 10-win team, you just got unlucky. Like, screw that. It's a 17-win game season. There ain't time for luck to balance itself out. For pretty much the entire year, we felt positive about the offense, but the defense now has become the main talking point after their worst performance of the year, really, coming against the Giants in the wild card game, a game in which they forced no turnovers and only 2 punts. Something the Giants and Cowboys each did in their wild card games in the first 5 minutes. When there was 10 minutes on the clock, both teams had forced 2 punts already. I was thinking about that during that game. So the Vikings defense, they ranked poorly all season, but for many games, like the Chicago game, they would come up with a big turnover late. You know, that was the game where Cam Dantzler just stripped the ball away from Amir Smith-Marset, and the game was basically over. And there were other examples where they came up big with a late takeaway or something, and they came out looking great at the end because they would win. This was a defense, though, that allowed, first of all, more points than the Vikings scored. They had the negative point differential, 30th in points allowed per game, 31st in yards allowed per game, 30th in yards per play allowed. However, they did step it up on third downs. They were 17th in third down conversion percentage. And when I look at defenses, I do primarily look at third downs and red zone. Vikings were better in those categories, 17th in third downs, 22nd in red zone touchdown percentage. One of the issues you run into, though, is just when you give up all those yards, you're going to give up more red zone trips and field goal opportunities, and it's a very unstable style of play. And I think all of us grew tired as the season went on with this scheme. When will they adjust? They're 7 yards off. Why are they letting everything underneath happen for free? Like, Vikings give up 25th best completion, or they were 25th in completion percentage allowed, 30th in yards per pass allowed. What's the point of a too high shell or playing quarters, playing 7 yards off the receivers if you're still going to give up the third worst yards per pass in the NFL? There isn't much point. And I think that they were relying so much early in the year on the pass rush masking things, and every scheme is going to look better when the pass rush is good. But let's be real, the Vikings didn't have a good pass rush. They had 2 good pass rushers. That's it. A couple times a game, Za'Darius and Daniil could show up for big plays, but this was not a team that created consistent pressure, a team that could get pressure in multiple ways. They relied on 2 players to generate the bulk of their pressures. And if you look at PFF's data, they have Za'Darius and Daniil Hunter as the only 2 Vikings to even average 2 pressures a game. They got nothing in the interior. So, they're like one of these defenses where, they want to play soft in the secondary. They don't want to load the box. And so you need some beef up front. You got to have your run stoppers in the middle if you're going to play that style, especially with lighter linebackers like they had in Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks, 2 guys that are shy of 240 pounds. And, the run defense was honestly pretty good for much of the year. Struggled a bit when Dalvin Tomlinson wasn't in there, but, no one's complaining about the run defense being why they lost a bunch of games this year or anything. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. I think they ranked about league average against the run, and they were 21st in opposing yards rushed per game, 22nd in yards a rush. So maybe it got a little bit worse as the season went on. But, this defense, I expected a little bit more than being one of the worst. I would have been thrilled if this were like the 19th ranked defense. But they played a very passive style. They got a lot of players in their 30s. Jordan Hicks, Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith. These guys have played their best football many years ago. And it's unfortunate to see them not end their careers better than this. But I think a lot about this Vikings scheme, and Brett Coleman's made a great video on it, and that franchise guy has talked about it because the Packers have done a lot of the same things. But I just think a lot about, when you're playing quarters with this Vikings defense, and they play a lot of coverages and everything, but when you're in quarters, you're playing 4 deep, 3 under. And if you're the Vikings, your 3 under there are going to be Chandon Sullivan, a nickel corner that you paid less than $2 million to. So you already know what level of play you're expecting there. He's not even a top 60 paid corner. All right? Made under $2 million this year. Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks. Those 3 defending the width of the field in the short and intermediate. No wonder they got absolutely annihilated, especially in the wild card game. Giving up deep cross after deep cross. And, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, but I think the deep cross is the most dangerous route today in the NFL. It's a route that gives man coverage fits because it's hard to just cover a guy from one side of the field to the other. And then there's so many ways you can beat zone coverage with it, and the more that relationship is developed between the quarterback and receiver, the more you can be like, just go to the open spot when you're on the other side of the field, and I'll meet you there. So, you got these defenses that seem like they're all optimized to just, let's not give up a 50-yard play deep downfield. And now you got the deep cross just running wild throughout the league. I mean, and Justin Jefferson did a lot of that on his way to 1,800 plus yards. He wasn't going vertical and catching a bunch of 50-yarders. He did this 12, 15, 20 yards at a time. And a lot of guys are doing that. Tyreek Hill is getting a lot of his stuff not 50 yards downfield. There's an element to that. But I think defenses, the pendulum has swung too far. We are over scared of giving up the deep ball. And we're treating every offense like they're led by Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Enough is enough. This offseason, these schemes, they gotta go. I get it, you don't want to lose over the top. It's demoralizing. But it's also demoralizing to give up higher percentage throws that offer yards after the catch opportunities, where you're making all these quarterbacks look like they're going to make $250 million any day now. So Viking defense sucked, and it got worse as the season went on. It just, a lot of times, first year of a scheme, be patient. These guys are learning. But it just never really got improved. There was talk about the Vikings making some adjustments late in the year, but they didn't show up against the Packers. The Bears game, the Bears, the Chicago Bears, who like randomly put Tim Boyle in the game after Nathan Peterman started. Yeah, that game didn't count. That game doesn't count. So obviously, I want to see the Vikings make changes defensively, and it's going to happen, I think, on all fronts. They have a lot of veterans there making big money. They got a defensive coordinator who I think is going to be on his way out, and then you got to bring in a bunch of new players. For the Vikings, this is very much an offseason coming up where you've got to get the defense better. You've got to find some young talent, and I think this is another year where you're seeing some of the issues with Rick Spielman's drafting since 2017. Who have the Vikings drafted since like 2015, 2016 that's like an established great starter? What was Danielle Hunter? 2014? Eric Kendricks was around that same time. The Vikings have failed to reload this defense, and that's why they're in the position they are now. And they got some things they have to take care of next year. They've put a ton of money into off-ball linebacker, run-stopping defensive tackle, safety, running back. You got to start focusing a little bit on these premium positions. And they added on to that, honestly, by trading for TJ Hawkinson. And I assume they will be giving him some kind of an extension, and probably should, given he is the second best receiving option now in the offense. But you can only invest so much into some of these more secondary needs. There's a lot less invested in corner. There's a lot less invested in, at some spots they have some young guys, like Christian Darrisaw's on a rookie deal, Brian O'Neill's on a second contract. So they've invested in tackle. They've invested with picks at these spots. But I think it's going to be an offseason where you see Kwesi make a lot of moves. Cuts, trades, acquisitions. And I'm honestly really excited for it because it almost feels like a there's nowhere to go but up situation. You were a top 10 offense, a bottom 3 defense, and you won 13 games. You're likely not winning 13 next year. Nobody's going to go 11-0 in one-score games again anytime soon. Although I will say, I get the Vikings were lucky this year in one-score games. But when you think about how unlucky they were in 21, it just kind of balances out. So we'll see how much it regresses next year, but ultimately this was probably the least dominant 13-win team I've ever seen. It didn't make them not fun to watch, though, as they would find ways to win these games late. And, watching Justin Jefferson eat these defenses up was always incredible to watch. I'm in awe with some of the things that he can do and some of the catches that he makes. Makes it look effortless. We really are seeing a Hall of Fame talent just dominate week in and week out in just his third season. How do I feel after all of this, though? 13-4, wild card loss. If I had to summarize it, I still end up feeling pretty positive. And I think a lot of it has to do with expectations. I came in with lower expectations than this. I still thought they could be a playoff team. I mean, I enjoyed the ride, and I'm a Minnesota sports fan. You think I've seen a lot of playoff success in my lifetime? Have you seen the record the Twins have set? There are only 2 teams, only 2 sports teams on the planet that I actually have an emotional attachment to, and that's the Vikings and the Twins. If your standard is going to be wake me up when they're successful in the postseason, you're probably not having fun ever. Since I became a fan, the 2000 season, I believe the Vikings have won 5 playoff games, which means they've averaged 1 playoff win every 4+ years. The last time the Twins won a season or a series in the playoffs or a game? What, 2004? Yeah. I try to enjoy the regular seasons maybe more than most because I know it's probably all I'm going to get. Expectations got to come into play. When I was younger, it was easier to enjoy some bad Vikings teams when they would have good wins. Remember the game where Matt Asiata started at running back against the Eagles? They upset Philly and he went like 30 carries for 51 yards and 3 touchdowns. I had a lot of fun with that game. And there were a lot of bad years where I could have fun with individual wins. I found it tougher in recent years because expectations were higher. You know, they had gone to the NFC title in 2017. They brought in Kirk Cousins. This was supposed to be a better stretch of play since 2018. And I couldn't enjoy any of last year. 21 was miserable to watch the Vikings, and they went 8-9. There have been worse teams that were more fun to watch. I wanted to go through the schedule a little bit and just kind of talk about the season as it unfolds. I think that's important because if you just look at a record, 13-4, you don't get any of the nuance, any of the ride there. And I always like to go kind of week by week and think about how the season truly went. And we start week 1 against the Green Bay Packers. I expected a win, not just because I'm a Vikings homer, but because it was at home. And it was Green Bay's, first game for Aaron Rodgers to play with his new rookie receivers. And this would be the game where they had the least experience playing together. And I was right about that game. The Vikings went on to win 23-7. The Packers looked very bad in that game. And it was not a sign of things to come for the Vikings defense. Not at all. That was their best game of the year and one of very few games where they allowed less than 20 points. So they win big against Green Bay. Justin Jefferson had the massive game. Defense actually looked really good. But then they go into Philadelphia and get rocked. And I expected them to lose this game, just not as badly as they did. The score was worse than it really was. The Vikings had red zone turnovers, and they were in the game at the very end. They just couldn't capitalize because Kirk's favorite receiver that night was Darius Slay. They come back against Detroit, and it was like, all right, they're going to start 1-2, aren't they? Down 2 scores in the first half, come back. Down 2 scores late in the game, come back again. KJ Osborne, big touchdown late. Vikings rally, beat Detroit. Then go to, that was the London game against New Orleans. That game feels an eternity ago. They went on the double doink. Jefferson had a good day, I know, against Marshawn Lattimore in that one. But a close game. A game where I was like, hey, maybe the Saints are actually okay. Maybe Andy Dalton's going to be good this year. It was just the Vikings defense being more true to form. Next game against Chicago, they probably should have lost or at least had a tougher time in that one. But it was the game where they had Cam Dantzler rip the ball away from Amir Smith-Marset. So Chicago didn't get a chance to tie when they were driving, and Justin Fields had brought them back in that game pretty much single-handedly. Then I expected a loss against Miami. They did not face Tua that week. They faced Skylar Thompson and then Teddy Bridgewater. And, they squeak out a win, 24-16. I thought they'd have a bit more problems with the speed of Miami, and 16 points allowed there. Still, that's one for the portfolio. I don't know how they got away with that, even against the quarterbacks they played. Arizona, after the bye week, 34-26. Another close one. They had to go down to the wire. Arizona kind of rallied late in that one. Washington. Kirk Cousins going back to face his old team there, and they got some late turnovers on Taylor Heineke in that one. That was another game where it was just like the Vikings formula relied on sacks and timely turnovers, and it showed up in a game like that. Also showed up in the Arizona game. And from there, the Vikings with one loss, 7-1 going into the Buffalo game. I'm like, all right, they probably lose this one, but 7-2 is a heck of a place to be at this point of the season, especially because that was in the midst of Green Bay losing every week. But we all know how that Buffalo game actually went, and it was one of the best regular season games that I have ever watched for the Vikings, and might have been the best game in the NFL all season. Certainly one of them. 33-30. Just when it looked like they had lost the game, Kirk Cousins couldn't sneak it in. The Vikings' luck shows up again. Josh Allen fumbles the snap. Vikings fall on it for a touchdown, and they intercept Josh Allen in overtime to preserve a win. That was so much fun, and by far just the height of watching the Vikings since the Minneapolis Miracle in 2017. After that, the Vikings were 8-1. A lot of the public wanted to buy in after that because they went toe-to-toe with Buffalo. They've come up clutch so many times. And then they were set to play Dallas. And I think it was immediately the Vegas lines. And I look at every Vegas total every week. I have for the last 6 or 7 years. I play a lot of DFS. It's one of those things that you just got to look at. And Cowboys were favored going on the road to Minnesota. I'm like, all right, I've seen some lines in the past where I'm like, didn't expect that. But I really didn't expect an 8-1 team at home to be underdogs. And we found out why a lot of advanced metrics and why the Vegas line and why so many things favored Dallas. Holy cow, 40-3. I forgot it was that bad, actually, because I didn't watch a lot of the second half. I'm like, all right, y'all ain't showing up. I ain't showing up. I'm going to go watch Scott Hansen and Red Zone and try to enjoy the rest of my Sunday. Now, unfortunately, this Dallas loss, a lot like the Eagles loss, follows a template of losses the Vikings have stacked up over the years, really since, 2015, 2016. And it's these games where they are undermatched in the trenches, mainly their offensive line, and the defenses take control early. They do not let up, and the Vikings cannot find a counterpunch. And I have grown so tired of watching that loss every year. That's where good teams are built, in the trenches. And the Vikings, they're improving the trenches, but they've continued to insist on these interior players that just continue to give up quick pressure. They don't handle power very well, and I really want to see a philosophy change away from this style of O-line play. It's not fun to watch the pocket collapse on Kirk Cousins, watch him not be able to step up. The Vikings interior has graded out this year much better as run blockers than pass blockers. Kirk Cousins was the most hit quarterback this year. He might have been the most sacked quarterback. I'd have to look into that. But the Vikings have lost that game to Dallas. They've lost it so many times. They lost it to Cleveland last year. They've lost it to the Packers in past seasons, the Bears. I've seen them lose that game. Oh, they lost it to Dallas last year too, on Halloween. So, stop getting bullied in the trenches. And this is also a bit why it's like the Vikings lost to the Giants. But it would have been a lot worse losing to San Francisco next week, man. Oh, they might have set some scoring records against the Vikings. Wow. Especially with that number one defense of theirs, getting some stops, maybe some turnovers. What the heck were the Vikings going to do against Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel? My God. It would have been terrible. That's probably why I'm not that mad. I'm not. I'm at ease with the season. Next week, man. All right. They lose to Dallas. That sucked. But 4 days later, Thanksgiving's coming up. Quick turnaround at home. New England Patriots. Ed Donatell's defense made Mac Jones look like a Pro Bowler. I think he was a Pro Bowler, wasn't he? Or something like that. It was probably the only game where Mac Jones looked really, really good this year. Hit a deep ball over the top to Nelson Aguilar. Had a lot of good throws in that game. Vikings benefited from a controversial call on Hunter Henry and a touchdown or not touchdown. They ruled it not a touchdown. And they also had a kick return touchdown where there could have been a holding call. So they got a little fortunate. But New England's special teams in that game, they were terrible. They screwed up every piece of special teams that you could. There was, I think, a block punt, maybe a muff punt. Like, New England did deserve to lose while getting kind of screwed by the refs. And you know what? You're playing with so much house money there, winning all those Super Bowls. Like, you can afford to take a couple L's here, like that in the Raider game. Like, it's just the universe coming back into balance. So, a lot of Patriots fans, too, were not happy in my mentions after that one. But I was thankful for the win and didn't really bother answering anything. Jets, next up. They actually played pretty good defense for about a half in here and then wanted the Jets to come back so they could add on to their one-score winning ways. And it did work. Mike White looked really good. Garrett Wilson looked really good. But the Vikings got a little bit more. Might have been a game where they had maybe a couple big defensive plays at some point. I can't exactly remember that one in great detail. But with those two wins after the Dallas loss, it was easier to say, you know what, maybe that was just a fluke. You ride the emotional high after the Buffalo game. These things happen. You're different now. Detroit, I think, was 6-7, hosting the Vikings. And they were favored. And it was like, geez, you're 10-2 going on the road to, I don't know, a barely 500, sub 500 team, and you're not favored? Detroit won by 11. I mean, Vegas was right again. The fraud talks were right again. You couldn't prove them wrong. Lions were playing good football at that stage, and the Vikings just, they couldn't get stops. They ran that big play to Penei Sewell. Dan Campbell's out there biting kneecaps, and gotta say, Lions are fun to watch, even though they're a division rival. After that, the Indianapolis game, 33-0 at halftime. Holy cow, these guys are frauds. Maybe the Lions will win the North. And then they explode in the second half. And it was fun to watch. And even in the second half, when it was 33-0, I felt like I didn't think they were going to come back. But I felt like there was a chance to make it close. Could you make it a 2-score game by the fourth quarter was kind of my thought process there. Not can you win, but can you get in a position where the Colts feel the pressure? And sure enough, they did. Defense played big in the second half. Kirk Cousins had an outstanding game. KJ Osborne, a career day. Justin Jefferson put one of the nastiest routes on Stephon Gilmore that you'll ever see. And they pull it off. Greg Joseph wins it at the buzzer. Vikings win the division with that game. Another high emotion type of win. And so you wonder how they respond to that high going against the Giants on Christmas Eve. And that was a really good game. But, I mean, Danny Dimes was lighting them up. Isaiah Hodgins, I'm not even sure if I knew who he was before that game. And I think I know about everybody who's fantasy relevant. I didn't know who this guy was. And Vikings, they went back and forth late. Giants kind of rallied to tie the game, and then the Vikings get in position for a 60-plus yard field goal, franchise record game winner. Greg Joseph carried off the field as the Vikings win again. 12-3. Maybe you can be the number 1 seed. Maybe you can be the number 2 seed. But to do that, you got to go into Green Bay. You got to stop a team that was hot. I mean, they had won 3 games in a row. One against the Bears, one against the Rams, and then the Dolphins, second half, just fell apart on them. Green Bay being hot, I think, was a little overblown. They were beating up on some bad teams, and then they played a good second half against Miami. And then blew the doors off the Vikings. I mean, my God, another game where you're underdogs going on the road to a sub-500 team. with your 12-3 record, and Green Bay annihilated them 41-3. I'm thankful they got those late touchdowns so it doesn't look as bad. Like, I don't think people are going to meme 41-17 as much as they would have memed 41-3. So, Nick Mullins kind of saved us a little bit there, a little embarrassment. And then, Chicago, whatever. All they cared about was the number 1 pick. I'm pretty sure that all the coaches probably just had the Texans game on their surfaces, on the sideline, and they were probably cheering on Davis Mills the entire time because the Bears were not serious about that football game. And the Vikings win by 16, second 2-score win of the year, but is whatever. And then, of course, you get your wild card game. Felt like the Vikings would be in a good spot against the New York Giants with their offense at least. The Giants were so good a few weeks before, I was kind of thinking like, all right, they were really good in that game. They could be good in this one. But can they do it again? Sure enough. Even better. They only punted twice. By the way, the Vegas line on Jimmy Gillen punts for that game was 5. I saw that. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way he punts 5 times in this game. Not a chance. He punts twice. Glad to be right about that. But Giants deserved to win. They played better. They were more explosive. They made more plays defensively. And the Vikings year is done. 13-4. An off-season or a regular season with so many highs. You think about the highlights of this year. You beat Green Bay decisively. You have one of the games of the year coming back to beat Buffalo. You win on Thanksgiving. You win on Christmas Eve. You pull off the biggest comeback in NFL history. That's quite a portfolio for your regular season. And then you get dumped at home, a place where you were 8-1. And I think that it would have to be. That was the first time the Vikings lost this year as favorites. So I felt like at home, you could trust them a little bit. But the Giants weren't rattled one bit by the crowd noise. And certainly not rattled by that Viking defense that left huge voids throughout the game. Saw a stat today, not sure where it came from, but apparently the Vikings, like some site must be looking at like well-covered percent or something like that. NFL average is like perfectly covered plays 34% of the time. Vikings were dead last in the wild card round with 20%. They couldn't throw off Daniel Jones, a quarterback whose 5th-year option was declined, a quarterback who's throwing to Isaiah Hodgins, Richie James, Kenny Golladay, Daniel Bellinger. Darius Slayton's a solid receiver, I think the best of the bunch, but what can you say? They just played terribly. And the scheme has been underperforming throughout the year. And relying on sacks and turnovers, is kind of my defensive philosophy in a way. But I like it playing a more aggressive style of defense personally. I like to blitz. I like to play man coverage. Now, is this Vikings team equipped to play man coverage? Probably not. I think there are other ways they could have played more aggressively, though. More press coverage, maybe a little more cover 3, so you have 4 underneath defenders instead of 3. Given your lack of athleticism underneath, that might have been a good move. But I think the Vikings were always at a disadvantage a bit personnel-wise because of the age, the lack of speed, and the lack of varieties they could create pressure. Like, they were bad enough in coverage, dropping 7 and rushing 4. You start talking about blitzing, and it's like, all right, we're asking more of even less cover players, and they're not doing well when they're 7. So, I don't know what the answers were for this year, but we sure found out what didn't work and what the Vikings have to change going into the offseason and next year. So, hats off to the New York Giants for winning this game. They were the much better team. They deserve to move on, and I'm happy for Blackjack and Bengal to Giants fans that were probably miserable watching that team the last 10 years. So hopefully they all enjoyed that, and we'll see how they do against Philadelphia. Although Philadelphia looks like a juggernaut, San Francisco looks like a juggernaut, and I just never felt like the Vikings were on that level. Maybe after the Buffalo game, I felt pretty good. I mean, they made plays against Buffalo. They got turnovers and big plays against Josh Allen. But after a while, you knew, like, all right, this is not a team on the same level of the 49ers, Eagles, or Cowboys. To me, those were always the best three teams in the conference. They had more ways they could beat you. They were good on both sides of the football. And I just didn't think anybody else in the conference really matched that, including Minnesota. So I felt like making it to the second round was kind of their ceiling. I'm not sure what the winning formula would be against San Francisco. Like, hope Brock Purdy suddenly, like, the guy's got to be so confident right now. How can you rattle him, especially with this defense? And they weren't going to win that battle up front, and they weren't going to stop Deebo Samuel, and they weren't going to stop Christian McCaffrey on first contact. Like, overall, I felt like it was a fun year. I enjoyed watching the team. I enjoyed the games. Maybe next time they can be like a little bit less one-score games. Maybe when you're winning, win a little more decisively. Maybe look like a 13-win team. Like, if they can be a little stronger and less lucky next year, like, that'd be a step in the right direction. If you go 11-6, win 4 games by multiple scores, and don't have to rely on one-score wins every week, I might even feel better about that team than this one. Going into the offseason, what do I want to see from the Vikings? Obviously, a coaching change for D coordinator. I want to see an influx of young talent on that side of the football as well. Make an effort to get faster. Make an effort to get more interior pass rush. And I think that you've got to get a little bit more in the secondary in terms of athleticism. And I know they tried this year, and it was unfortunate. Lewis Seen suffered the terrible leg injury against the Saints. Andrew Booth had injuries affect him throughout the year. And both of those guys are more athletic at this stage than Patrick Peterson, Cam Dantzler, Chandon Sullivan. So that was unfortunate, but injuries are going to happen. And the Vikings, I think they ran so good this year in terms of injuries and not having too many things exposed, more than already were, because they stayed relatively healthy. Going back to last offseason, I was all in favor of them, trading Kirk and kind of turning this roster on its head. And I was surprised when they extended him and kept around so many veterans. It seemed like a team that wasn't good enough to go all in on. And ultimately, I think that's where they ended up. It was like, all right, maybe a little overzealous. You won 13 games, though. I mean, it's a successful season by a lot of measures. And at the end of the day, it was nice to see guys like Kendricks, Thielen, Harrison Smith. If this is it, it was a lot better, I think, to go out like this than the way things have gone since 2020. It's just, that was such a great core of players in the 2017 run, and they were still good for years after and just couldn't put things together to make the playoffs much. But at the very least, it was nice to see them get one more shot. But this is it. And it's time to start making some serious moves. I think there could be some other changes coming to this Viking team. I wonder about Dalvin Cook and if they're going to think about making a change there. There are just a lot of areas where you could try to save some money. And when you look at some of the contracts for next year and the cap numbers, I mean, Adam Thielen at 19.9 when you can free up at least 13 of that. Zadarius Smith, he's on a fake contract. They manipulated that thing so much with like void years and whatnot to where his cap hit this year was like $4 million, even though like on paper it looks like a $15 million a year contract. So his deal was fake. It was always meant to be busted up after this year with some dead money. Eric Kendricks, he could be a player who could be released and free up like $9 million. I also wonder about Jordan Hicks because I don't think that he had a stellar year or anything. CJ Ham could be a player they try to save a couple million on. I think they're going to be busy. But because so much of the attention is on the defense that was already terrible last year, I can't help but feel somewhat okay about the whole situation. And I think overall, my perspective, like when you have a team that has a good offense, like if you have a top 10 offense, I don't really think of you as a rebuilding team. If all you're rebuilding is a defense, like you don't even have to fix it to be a good team. A top 10 offense with a number 20 defense is probably a division winner in most divisions. So, I think try to keep the offense as strong as it's been. Maybe re-strategize some things along the offensive line. Maybe start to think about adding another playmaker, as it looks like Adam Thielen's age is catching up to him. And I think he only had one catch this year longer at 30 yards. I know there was only one game where he had a catch longer than 25 yards. So I feel good about the offense. And I don't have a lot of complaints this year about Kirk Cousins. I know in the past I've said that I'm done. I want him to be traded. And I remember saying, like, no, I'm not interested in seeing what he looks like in the Kevin O'Connell offense. But, he was good this year. I think this was the best year of Kirk Cousins' career. Statistically, it might not agree, but he came up big in the fourth quarter. He had a lot of comebacks, a lot of big plays, and I felt like for the vast majority of the year, he was a major positive for the Vikings. Now, obviously, there are still things that I think will keep him from being one of the better quarterbacks, and I think if you break it down into tiers, like he's always been a tier 3 quarterback to me. So, a quarterback who needs a lot right around him to succeed, but when those things are there, he can make you think that he's more of a tier 2 quarterback. But then if you remove some of those things, he drops down, you get it. But, Kirk Cousins probably back for another year or two. I think that's fine. Took a lot of punishment this year. He's incredibly durable, and, he was good this year for the Vikings. Just wish maybe he had done something differently on the last throw of the season. This team overachieved a bit. They were fun to watch. They were great at home. But ultimately, they weren't as good as other teams in the playoffs. And luck was eventually bound to run out. It happened to be against the team they were favored against at home. But that's just the way it goes sometimes. Looking through some stats here for any more talking points. Alexander Mattison, he's now going to be a free agent. And I think I'm not saying it's likely, but I think there is a chance the Vikings extend Mattison and move on from Dalvin Cook. I think there's a possibility of that. But I don't know. Cook had some good moments this year, but he only had 5 big runs of 20 yards or more, and he's always been kind of a big play running back. I don't think you necessarily have to move off of Dalvin Cook, but it's something they'll probably have to have a conversation about, and maybe Mattison would end up being somebody that at least have as like a 2-back committee. But regardless, Madison's a free agent. Thielen, is that his last game as a Viking? Does he come back on a smaller contract? Does he go to a different team? Does he retire? Who knows at this stage? KJ Osborne, I think he's somebody that is developing into more and more of a solid number 2 receiver. He gives the Vikings an option to go vertical, and he's been good the last 2 years. And it really took them until the Colts game this year to kind of remember that. And I know KOC wasn't here last season. He wasn't in Minnesota. So a lot of his production was late in the year. And oddly enough, a lot of his production came in games where the Vikings really needed him. TJ Hawkinson was very productive this year, and the Vikings trade for him, I think, was a good one. And not just because of Irv Smith's injury at the time, but also because I think if they hadn't made the trade, it might have been a little more apparent that, maybe Thielen's not the player he once was, and we need someone to take some attention off of Jefferson or capitalize when teams are putting that attention on Jefferson. And Hawkinson had a big playoff game. He had 2 big games against the Giants. So while I don't think Hawkinson's an elite tight end, I think he's firmly, top 6, 7, and will be a good option for the Vikings going forward. I think Irv Smith's going to be moving on. Jalen Naylor, that's somebody I like to see more next year if he can start pushing for some real playing time. Jalen Reagor, he wasn't even getting like one target a game or anything, so I don't think there's a whole lot there. Probably a roster bubble guy next year. And then on defense, yeah, Kendricks, Hicks, Harrison Smith. Does Patrick Peterson come back? Peterson was good this year. I'm not sure if I think he was quite as good as a lot of numbers indicate, but he was by far the Vikings' best corner, and I think I'd be interested in him coming back for another year, but you have to keep investing into that position because it's by no means solved. They got pretty fortunate, though. Duke Shelley showed up, and he was pretty competitive. Had a lot of good moments. Cam Bynum, I'm not sure he made the strongest impression this year. There seemed to be a lot of miscommunications and stuff that got by him. Chandon Sullivan, I think he'll be gone. That was just kind of signing because you needed the starting nickel, and he must have been the best available at the time. But they'll go in a different direction, I imagine. One guy I'd like to see more next year would be Brian Asamoah. He has the athleticism you look for at linebacker, and I was hoping by the end of the year he'd be playing much more of a role. I still wonder about guys like Caleb Evans, who had a couple of moments, but also battled through some concussions this year. But the Vikings need a major influx of talent on defense. I'd be shocked if their first couple of picks this year weren't spent on that side of the football, or if they try to make a couple big free agent moves. They'll have to make some cuts, some tough ones with guys that have been in Minnesota for a long time, but I'm hopeful going into the offseason. But also at the same time, I know that you ran hot this year in one-score games. Next year, probably not going to do so. Lions look really good. Green Bay, if Rodgers is back with them next year, probably better than the team they were for much of this season. So, I mean, I haven't seen this team win back-to-back like division titles or even have back-to-back playoff seasons very often. So, as time goes on, I'm even more aware of that kind of thing. I try to enjoy seasons that are at least as good as this one and understand that it might not be the same next year. There are no promises of that. So, I think that's about everything I wanted to talk about here in this video. Overall, fun regular season. Not surprised it ended the way it did. I thought they might make it to the second round. But at the end of the day, the record probably, a bit better than where they actually were as a team. And now I think it's been very clear what they need to work on going into the offseason. And we'll see what they do and if I feel like talking about it here on the channel. But I hope you enjoyed today's video, everybody. Excited for the playoffs to continue on. Games have been pretty fun. Hoping for some, hopefully some fun upsets to shake up the playoff landscape. But that is going to do it for me. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Leave your thoughts below on the Minnesota Vikings this year and heading into next. And I'll see you all next time. Have a great day.